For your Xbox and PlayStation repairs, visit consoletherapy.com.
Hello everyone, hope you are all well. Welcome back to the channel. In this video we are going to show you how to replace a USB port on the front of an Xbox One S. Now why would you need to do that? Now sometimes the front USB ports can get damaged. Obviously they've got a lot of usage, with controllers going in and out, with external hard drives being plugged in and out, and this one, as you can actually see, is damaged. So we're going to show you how to get that replaced. So to start us off, what we need to do is remove this black plastic part of the casing on the underside of the Xbox. The easiest place I've always found to start opening the Xbox is here by the warranty label. Now obviously opening the Xbox is going to invalidate your warranty, so make sure your Xbox is no longer in warranty before you attempt this. Easiest way to do it is get your pry tool, slide it underneath the black plastic, so it's kind of in between the white casing and the black plastic here, and then just start to move the pry tool up nice and gently. And what you'll find is the actual black casing will start to pop off. You can go from the sides here and just give it a little helping hand, and you'll feel it like make that noise. Don't worry about it. It is just the casing popping away. Go over in this corner here, similar thing, pop it away, and then just work down the sides as you go. Okay, and then this black plastic bottom piece simply lifts off, and you can put that to one side. And there you see we have a number of screws. Now, there are green screws, black screws and silver screws. All of them hold different parts in. Essentially, the green screws hold the white casing, the top casing, so all of the green screws need to come out. The black screws hold in the heatsink to the actual motherboard, and then the silver screws hold in things like the power supply, the optical drive, etc. So let's start by removing all of the green screws, because they need to come out so we can take the top case off. Okay, so there's 6 green screws in total. Off they all come, so pop them to one side. And then what you can do is flip the Xbox back over and remove the white top case. Now, easiest way to do this is grab the back of it. So this is the rear of the Xbox, this is the front of the Xbox. Grab the back of it and pull out slightly, like so. And then it will pop off very gently. And then you can lift up the back, like so. Give it a bit of a wiggle, up it will come, and then pull it this way forward. And then you'll see this RF shield. This isn't screwed in, so that can simply just pop off like so. And now you actually get to see the entirety of the Xbox. You've got the hard drive, power supply, that's the fan and heatsink underneath, the optical drive as well. Right, so now the white case is off, green screws are off. We can now remove all the other screws as we are taking the Xbox to bits. Right, so that's all of the screws out. Now we can flip the Xbox back over. Just put your hands just underneath just to grab the hard drive, the power supply, etc. Otherwise it will fall out. Twist it back round. Now what we can do is start pulling these items out. So let's remove the hard drive first of all. As you can see, you can just lift it out of the way. Now there's a couple of cables you need to be aware of. There's the power cable and data cables just here. So you literally remove those just by pulling upwards like so. So literally just give it a tug upwards, and then same with the other cable, give it a tug upwards, then that pops off like so. Same for the DVD optical drive, pull it upwards. Now be really careful not to wiggle too much. What I noticed earlier, someone has actually attempted to remove this already, and they've actually broken the connector, and that's because when they removed it, they wiggled the cable too much. So just lift it upwards like so, and it will pop off. We can remove the power supply as well. Let's just show you that. Now there's a cable which runs from the power supply all the way along to the motherboard, and actually down the side here, what you'll see, there's a little black plastic clip which you need to move to one side in order to take off the connector, and that just connects on the motherboard. To get your pry tool, just put it to the side of the connector. You'll see the little black tab, push the black tab in, and then just pull the cable upwards like so, and off it will come. Okay, and then the power supply can come out as well like so. Now, two little things to the front here. There's this actual bit of black plastic. Now that needs to pop out like so. So you just lift that out. What that is, that's basically a screw guide for the green screws. So when you're screwing back on the top case, the green screws go through that. So you just need to remove that out of the way. And then also, just here above the USB port, there is a little RF shield as well. So what you can do is just get your fingernail, just bend it slightly, and off that will pop like so. Okay, now before we do anything else, what we need to do is remove this front power board and also remove the side Wi-Fi card. So there's 4 screws on this front one, 4 black screws, off they come. And then to remove the power board, there's no more connectors that side, but there's the connector here. So literally just pull it up towards you nice and gently, and off that will pop like so. As you can see, that connector goes into there and that comes off. Just put your power board to one side. This actually doubles as the Wi-Fi for the controllers as well. So you've got your power button there, got your eject button there, and this chip here is Wi-Fi for your controllers, whereas this little board on the side is your Wi-Fi for your network. So 3 black screws on here that need to come out. And then very similar to the power board at the front, there's this connector at the bottom here. Just give it a bit of a tiny little wiggle, and off that will pop like so. Right, now what we can do is actually remove the motherboard itself. So that fan stays in place for the time being. What I normally do here is just put my thumb by the USB port, give it a bit of a wiggle, and then the motherboard starts to come out. Then you can actually grab it a little bit more, pull it backwards like so, and then off it comes away from the chassis. Now this bottom chassis then you can put to one side. And there you have the motherboard, still with the heatsink on. Now, if you flip that over, they've got what they call the X clamp here, which basically clamps the heatsink through securely onto the motherboard, to making sure that there's a good bind between the heatsink and the actual APU or the processor on the motherboard, to make sure that heat transfers correctly. Now, there are specialist tools you can get to actually remove these X clamps. What I find the easiest way to do, as long as you're careful though, is actually just get a flat blade screwdriver. Right, find one of these legs that's actually got a bit of a gap between the actual screw hole and the metal plate itself, right? And then get your flat blade screwdriver and very gently just start prying the clamp up. Now, the way I do this is I move the screwdriver back and forth like so, just very gently. I don't stab down on it, okay? And my advice is kind of just, with being very careful, put something just around here. So even if you're using a cloth, right, or even just your finger like I do, and I'll do that just in case I slip, okay, and it will go into my finger, right? Because I'm not putting lots of pressure on it, it's not going to hurt my finger, right? But what it will do, it will stop the screwdriver from sliding across the motherboard and then damaging any of these tracks, or actually knocking off one of these tiny capacitors by mistake. Right, so as you see, flat blade screwdriver in, give it a bit of wiggle, and then it will gently come looser and looser. You know, with each one you do, that's the first one. work your way around. Second one, give it a bit of a wiggle, and off it will come. And then by the time you get to the third and fourth, it's just going to pop off by itself pretty much. Give it a bit of a wiggle, like so. And then the X clamp itself just lifts off. Now flip the motherboard back over. Keep holding onto the heatsink underneath, like so. Turn it over. And then there's a cable just down here which powers the fan. So you can literally just lift that off, like so, and then off comes the heatsink and fan, like so. So if you pop that to one side, there we have the motherboard in all its glory. Some very dry thermal paste. Always replace your thermal paste, right? So when you put it back together again, make sure you clean this up, make sure you clean all of that up, and then put some brand new thermal paste back onto the processor before you put your heatsink back on. So now we have the motherboard out. You can actually now really see the damage to that USB port at the front here. It's completely bent up. The actual plastic is completely broken, and the teeth, or the pads I should say, in the actual port itself don't look that healthy, right? So we need to get this replaced, okay? So we're going to heat up these pads here with our heat gun. We're going to drop off the 40 USB ports, and I've actually got a replacement USB port from a donor board, and we're going to pop that in its place. All right, so let's go through that now. So what we need to do to make our life easy as possible to remove this is to replace this leaded solder, which would have come in factory, with some unleaded solder. So we just go along and basically mix in some, as I say, unleaded solder. Now, first things, we'll add this, which is called flux, which will help the solder, which I'm about to put on, the unleaded solder, melt into the leaded solder which is installed on factory. So I literally come along with the soldering iron and I solder, heat up these areas, these legs, and then just push in some of the unleaded solder, and we're going to go across all of these pins and do exactly the same thing. Very rough and ready, like so. So now each pin has a good healthy dosage of unleaded solder. What we're going to do is go along and then heat this up with the heat gun, and then we will gently remove the 40 USB port. Now, best thing to do this is, because the USB port is obviously resting on the mat, we just need to raise it up a little bit, because we're going to heat this side up of the motherboard, and then the USB port essentially will drop off this way. Okay, so what I think we'll do for that is we'll get set up, and then we'll get underneath the microscope. Right, so here we are under the microscope. Now you can see obviously the solder that I've added on. What we are going to do is get our heat gun and start heating this area up. The heat gun I am going to set at 480 degrees with an airflow of around 70%. So let's start doing that now. We're going to come in and just start heating up the whole area. Now, some of these parts, there's a couple of plastic parts on the casing of the USB ports which will melt, which we don't really care about. There's this foam around the USB ports which will melt as well, but again we don't care about it because the whole thing's coming out anyhow. And then we're going to come in with the tweezers and see if it's ready to go. Don't pull on the port itself, just let it fall out, and there it comes out really easily, just like so. Okay, now we need to clean up this whole area as well to remove the excess solder. Now, while the area is still hot, what I'm going to do is just give it a little bit more flux to coax the solder out of those holes. Come back in with a heat gun and using a solder sucker. I'll put a link in the description for a solder sucker. We're going to come in and just remove the solder from each hole. And then what you see, you're left with all of the solder removed from the holes, like so. Get rid of any excess. Ready to take our new USB port or our replacement USB port. So what I like to do is come in with some isopropyl alcohol or IPA. Give the area a clean while it's still warm. Just to remove any excess flux. So in we come, we've got our replacement USB port, which obviously looks a lot more healthier than the old one. So lift the motherboard up gently. Let's just get that lined up. Bear with me a second. Like so, so that pops into place. See underneath, coming through. Now, you can probably just rest this flat down, but just make sure you've got a hold in it and make sure all of the pins come through like you can see here, which they are, which is great. Now what we need to do is come along, add some flux, and then with a finer tip soldering iron this time, we are just going to come in and just add the solder to each pin and leg. And then come in with some isopropyl or IPA, give the whole area a good clean. So there we go, one new USB port installed, nice and fixed. So things to remember, make sure you get lots of heat in the board here when you're removing the old broken USB port, and you know, make sure you give it a good clean up after as well. I will leave a link in the description below to a couple of options for heat guns and soldering irons. The one I use here, I use the quick heat gun and I use the JBC soldering iron. However, I know not everyone has got the budget, especially if you're just doing this as a one-off, to spend lots of money on tools. So I will leave a link in the description below to a couple of options, to a couple of tools like heat gun and soldering iron that I feel can actually do the job without actually breaking the bank as well. Right, now the thing to do is get everything put back together again. Okay, so reassembly. First thing to do is make sure we clean off this old thermal paste. Now, easiest way to do that is get some IPA spray or isopropyl alcohol. Just put it all over the processor area and all over the heatsink area. Give it a few minutes to let it soak in, and then get a cotton bud. And then just go along and start cleaning it all off. All right. Don't use too much force. It should just come off quite easily itself. And the key thing is to make sure that you know, the heatsink lays dead flat on the actual processor, so it gives a good you know, bind or connection to the actual processor, so it does draw all the heat away. Okay. Just get a cloth and just wipe the excess away. And same for the heatsink as well. heatsink is a lot easier because it's a smoother surface, so it just comes off really easy. And again, get your cloth, give that a good wipe over. Now, the thing to remember, as I say, is make sure it's a good clean surface. Make sure on the actual process, you don't have to get all of this off around here, but what you do have to make sure is on this square here of the actual APU, make sure there's no residue heatsink paste on there, or thermal compound I should say, on there. And then just make sure where you do have any excess around here, just make sure it's not raised too high where it's going to make the heatsink uneven. Okay. Now what we need to do, let's give it a quick wipe over again, is add some new thermal compound or heatsink paste, like so. Get the actual heatsink and fan itself. Oh, hold on, let's just clear that away. There's some excess. I've cleaned it off around here. Good, let's get rid of all of that. Okay, as I say, get your heatsink and fan. Only goes in one way round. Let's just zoom you out so you can see that. So there's a cable here, power cable for the fan. So that goes towards the bottom corner down here. Pop that cable in now. Makes life a hell of a lot easier. Then flip it around, and then you want to put the X clamp back on again. Now, the thing when putting on the X clamp is, easiest way to do it is line all the holes up. Just gently rest it on. Okay, make sure they're all even, and then just put gentle pressure on, just so it pops over each one. If you feel like you have to use too much pressure, that means it's not lined up properly. Final one pops on like so. So you shouldn't have to put loads of weight on that to actually pop those on. It should just be a gentle pressure on there. Okay, so that is the heatsink and fan back on. Now, next step is to put it back into the bottom chassis. Yeah, and reassembly is essentially the reversal of removal, right? So pop the ports in, the back ports in first of all, and then just drop the motherboard in, right? Flip it over quickly, and you'll see here next to the USB port, there's a little plastic lug which needs to pop through, right? So just make sure that wiggles through and pops through like so, right? So once that plastic lug is through, you know the motherboard is seated correctly back into the bottom chassis. Okay, now we need to put the RF gasket back on, and before you forget, the screw guide. That only goes in one way round. These little plastic lugs go into the front of the chassis, like so. Take your little RF gasket metal piece, give it a quick bend together because you've bent it earlier, and then pop it over the case like so. So this bit should be at the front, and then you can see that at the rear. So it just basically goes over the case like so. Now, what I like to do next is pop in the power supply. So tab on the connector goes to the outside. So literally just click that in place. Cable runs on over the top of the power supply, and then just be careful of these little capacitors here. Make sure you don't knock them off. And then there's, I should have showed you that there's 3 plastic lugs here on the power supply which goes into these 3 holes in the motherboard. So you just move it around like so, put it in place, give it a wiggle, and it will find the holes, right? And you'll know you've got it in the holes because you can't move it anymore, right? Next, we can pop on the hard drive. So literally just push the cables back in. They only go one way, right? So the hard drive goes into these this one black connector and this white connector here. So you pop that one on and then pop that one on. All right, so you can see those two that it goes into, and then just fold the hard drive over like so for now. Optical drive, same thing. Sorry, I put the hard drive back too soon. Leave the hard drive like so. Optical drive, pop their connectors back onto the motherboard like so. You're just literally pushing them down like so. Let me just show you that. So you've got all your cables back on like that. Okay. Again, give the optical drive a bit of a wiggle. There's a hole there which it pops into, and a hole just here that it pops into through the motherboard. And then, I should have said, pop the hard drive over, and that locates itself on top of the power supply there, and the little hole in the motherboard there. Okay, now, top RF gasket of the casing goes next. Give it a wiggle. There's a locating pin there, and then there's the holes to connect everything back to the white case. And what's left? Power board. Okay, so keep squeezing this only gently so it doesn't fall open. Get your power board, white connector to the white socket there. Literally just hover it over and then just pop it down like so. And the same for the Wi-Fi card. Again, pop it over like so, pop it on, and then put your screws back in again. Now all we do, flip it over and put in all of our screws. Now a quick tip, anything that's stamped on the case which is A is a black screw, anything which is B or C is a silver screw, and anything which is stamped F is a green screw. Okay, so that is all the black and silver screws put back in place. Now next we need to put the top white cover on. Now quick tip on this one, you will see on the front of the DVD there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 black plastic lugs. I don't know if you can make that out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's a silver of the metal case little lug there as well, which all stick out from the front. Right. Now, if you look at the actual case of the Xbox, you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes, and then a 6th hole there. So these 5 holes need to line up with those 5 black lugs, and then the 1 hole underneath needs to line up with that silver piece sticking out from the chassis. And the easiest way I find to do this is you start from the front, put the case on the front first of all, and then you're kind of pushing backwards, and then, as well as laying it down at the same time. Okay, now that kind of seems to fit nicer that way. Once you get to a certain point, you'll see at the back there's a little gap, so just make sure that you lift out these side bits and pop them over like so. 1 and 2. Okay, and then the back should be completely flush. Spin the Xbox around and just make sure these buttons click. Right, if they don't click, that means these lugs which are on the other side of this white plastic and on the optical drive, they're not matching up properly, right? So this casing will be bowing very slightly, so you won't be able to push the button because the button doesn't actually make contact with the actual power board, which is sitting behind here. So the case bows. So just make sure this is sitting nice and flush and you can click the buttons. Once you've done that, flip it back over. Time for the green screws. Now, once all the green screws are in, the final piece is to pop the black bottom case on, right? And it goes round one way. Piece where the warranty label is goes to the back, and then there's a hole for the USB port which goes to the front. Easiest way to do this is just line it all up, right, so it doesn't move, okay? And then simply get your hands and just push down gently, like so. And everything will pop back into place. Have a look, make sure the USB hole lines up, make sure your bind button still clicks, power button clicks, and your eject button still clicks. Have a quick look on the rear, make sure the warranty label still lines up and everything's nice and flush at the back. Right, well that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much for your view. If you did like the video, please consider giving us a thumbs up. That really does help the channel out. Also, if you like these kind of videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are going to be posting new videos weekly now. So once a week, you'll see a video on fixing the Xbox S, the Xbox X or PlayStation. And we've got some PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series videos coming along very soon as well. As mentioned earlier, any tools that you've seen in this video, I will put a link in the description below to them. They are affiliate links. Again, it does really help us out if you use those links, so thank you very much if you do. All that's left for me to do is, again, say thank you very much for watching. Please take care of yourselves. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments below. I'm always on YouTube and I'm always answering any questions, as you can see. So please feel free to ask any questions in the comments section below. Take care of yourselves. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye for now.